joining us this evening for our San Clemente Housing Element Community Workshop number 2. It is 5:34. We can go ahead and get started. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you're welcome to watch it again, or if you know of someone who's interested and was not able to attend live tonight, it will be available on the city's YouTube channel to be able to view it in the future. And I will go ahead and turn it over to one of our consultants to start the PowerPoint.
Are you seeing the PowerPoint on? Just want to double check if you're seeing the proper screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. I am Veronica Tam, and I'm going to just go over the tonight's agenda with the Housing Element Update Workshop number 2. We're going to do a quick introduction and how to participate and just a brief agenda. With the team, you've met City Staff Jennifer Savage. On my end, Veronica Tam Associates, we have online Veronica Tam, myself, and my staff, Jamie Power. And then we also have City Place Planning, Claudia Tafford, that's also will be presenting tonight. Essentially, this is a webinar, so you're automatically muted, and the video will be turned off during the presentation. You will be you'll have the opportunity to provide comments and questions using the question and answer function, and Jennifer will kind of referee the questions, and to the extent that we can, we'll answer it during the webinar. If there is something that we cannot answer tonight, we will follow up later on. We also have some poll questions throughout the presentation tonight. So just to start today's agenda, we're going to go over the housing element requirements again. This is something that we presented in an earlier webinar before, but just to make sure that there are new participants tonight, then we want to just briefly go over the housing element requirements. But the focus of today's discussion is really on potential sites for housing needs and some of the housing strategy that the city has in meeting the housing needs in the community. And then we'll turn the attention to the safety element that's also being updated at the same time. So just briefly go over the housing element. What is the housing element? It is one of the required elements of the city's general plan. In the housing element, we looked at the housing needs in the community, and then what are the best ways to address the needs of the existing and also future residents of San Clemente. The housing element is essentially a policy document. It sets goals, policies, and objectives for housing and identify, housing conditions and needs in the community. What is different about the housing element is the fact that it needs to be updated every 8 years. And there is a statutory timeline in updating it. For Orange County communities, we have to update the housing element by October 15, 2021, but it does have a grace period of 120 days. The other thing that is also different about the housing element is that it has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. More about the housing element requirements. There are some key requirements that when we look at the housing element, what are the contents? It needs to accommodate the projected housing needs in the city as mandated by the state. This whole process of projecting housing needs in the community is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA, and you'll hear that term quite often throughout the housing element process. So with the housing element allocation, with the housing allocation, we have to increase housing production in the community to meet this housing need. On top of that, we also need to preserve existing housing in the community, not only just regular housing, but also affordable housing, recognizing that it's more expensive to build affordable housing. Therefore, preserving what you have and improving the quality of what you have is important. The housing element also has a special focus on people who are low and moderate income. The state recognizes that in order to facilitate housing in the community, it pretty much has to focus also some attention to people who are low and moderate income and people who have with special needs. Even though the housing element says that you have to provide housing for all income groups, but it does recognize that low and moderate income households and population with special needs require additional attention. And lastly, the housing element requires that we promote fair housing choice. Once you have provided the opportunities in the community, you have to make sure there's equal access to that housing opportunities. Now, we mentioned earlier the Regional Housing Needs Allocation or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA. This process, this is the key component of the housing element requirement. It's definitely the key component of what the state will look at in terms of reviewing for compliance with state law. And this Regional Housing Needs Allocation is a top-down process to some extent. The state HCD decides how much housing in the entire state is needed over the next 8-10 years. And then it allocates that need into the regional planning agencies. In terms of the Southern California, the regional planning agency is the Southern California Association of Governments. It oversees 6 counties: Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Imperial. These are the 6 counties within the SCAG region. The SCAG regions got allocated 1.34 million housing units of new housing that the 6-county region has to be responsible for over the next 8 years. Orange County got an allocation of 183,430 units. That equates to about 15% of the entire region's housing needs. Each jurisdiction in the county then also gets an allocation. For San Clemente, we have an allocation of 978 units. This RHNA allocation is not a production obligation, but it's a planning requirement. The city must identify adequate sites with appropriate development standards and zoning to allow that much housing to occur for all income groups in the community. The regional housing needs allocation is divided into income levels. Very low income, people who are at up to 50% of the area median income. Low income, people who are up to 80% of the area median income. Moderate income, up to 120%. And above moderate income, people who makes households that makes more than 120% of the area median income. In the 5th cycle housing element, during the current cycle that we're still in from 2013 to 2021, our RHNA was 581 units. But for the 6th cycle, upcoming cycle, 2021 to 2029, our RHNA has increased to 978 units. The entire region, the RHNA increased by more than, I think, 3 times. The last time the 6-county region's RHNA was less than 500,000. And now we have over 1.34 million. And so our increase, while it's significant, is relatively moderate compared to some other jurisdictions in the region. So this RHNA is divided into income categories. It again is because it's not a production requirement, but a planning requirement. It uses density as a proxy to feasibility for facilitating lower income housing. And generally at the Orange County area with a population over 50,000, we're mandated by law to use a 30 units to the acre as a threshold for feasible for lower income housing. Before we move on to how we are going to address the RHNA, we want to talk a little bit about the housing programs the city has and some of the accomplishments that the city has been able to achieve over the last few years. During the 5th cycle housing element 2013 to 2021, the city has a RHNA of 581 units. We were able to produce a lot of the units based primarily at market, which is only affordable to above moderate income households. But because the city has a relatively robust affordable housing program, you were able to produce some affordable housing under very low income, and moderate income. And so we're able to meet a certain percentage of our lower income and moderate income regional housing needs allocation, RHNA. Although we didn't fully meet it, we're probably doing better than some other communities because of our strong affordable housing commitment that the city has. And some of these programs include the Inclusionary program, your neighborhood revitalization program, and you also have an affordable housing program. So we're going to go into the accomplishment a little bit more. The city has an inclusionary housing program. Any developer that builds more than 6 units is required to provide 4% of the units as affordable to very low income households, either on-site or off-site, or pay an in-lieu fee. Or that there's also a possibility to donate land in order to make in lieu of producing the units on site. In lieu fees is a knowing of then provided as a zero interest or low interest loan to nonprofits to provide affordable housing that's long term. In terms of the inclusionary housing ordinance, the city is currently drafting an ordinance to update the program to establish a new and more streamlined way to calculate the fee, and probably update it on a periodical basis to match the market conditions. This inclusionary housing program will be included in the updated housing element. The city also has a neighborhood revitalization program, essentially providing rehabilitation assistance to qualified property owners and owner-occupied properties in order to make sure that they fix the homes. And during the 5th cycle housing element, as of today, the city provided 23 loans through the home rehab program. We will continue this effort because it's certainly something that's needed in the community. The city also provides general funds to support special needs population with supportive services, including housing services and providing supportive services for the homeless and for the youth as well. And specifically, the Family Assistance Ministries is one of the key nonprofit organizations providing a variety of services for residents that are at risk of becoming homeless and those who are actually homeless. And Family Assistance Ministries assisted more than 40,000 individuals. These may be duplicated people, but there are 80,000 individuals that benefited from the programs funded by the city. And last but not least, the city has an affordable housing program. This program essentially solicits the participation of nonprofits to actually rehabilitate or construct new affordable housing and making those housing as long-term affordable housing. This, the city used in lieu fees and some other fundings to help facilitate the development of that. And you can see that the city has done some affordable housing projects in the last 8 years. We definitely will continue this program into the new housing element. Now, the 2 affordable housing projects that the city completed during the last 8 years or so is the Cotton Point Senior Apartments and Las Palmas Village. Together, they provided 93 affordable units to the city's residents. The challenge that we have is to meet the regional housing needs allocation by planning and land use policy. Now, we have 978 units. The city is able to take credit for accessory dwelling units. Based on historical trends, we don't anticipate a lot of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, to be constructed in the city, around 72 of those. In the 5th cycle housing element, we have identified adequate sites for the regional housing needs allocation. Some of the sites have already been built, but some have not. The ones that are remaining available only accounts for 929 units or so. Together, we have the the capacity for about 400 units. So we're short by 577 units in terms of capacity in meeting the regional housing needs allocation. So how do we intend to accommodate the 577 units? And that's where we are. The reason why we are having this meeting today is we need to input into where would be the most appropriate places for this housing and what kind of intensity you're looking for. In selecting sites for the regional housing needs allocation, it's pretty regulated under state law. We have to look at the existing use, whether the existing use will have a potential of turning over in the next 8 years. So we're looking at places that has high vacancy or turnover rates, that are declining or marginal operations, or maybe outdated models of business that maybe that would probably be kind of phased out over the next 8 years. We also look at the age and condition of the structure. If it's an older building that hasn't been improved for a long time, that may be ripe for redevelopment. We look at existing uses. Can we increase the capacity on site? Is it possible to put more units on site? We also looked at what about the property owners and developers? Have they expressed interest in specific locations? We also look at areas that seems to be experiencing active development activities. These are the criteria that the city uses in selecting potential sites for the regional housing needs allocation. And so we're going to start the first poll question. There are certain neighborhoods in the city. We're looking for your input in terms of which are these areas that would be most appropriate for additional housing. If you would go ahead and answer the poll question.
Yeah, and this is Jennifer, and it should be noted that these are potential areas. They're not set in stone. There's certainly an opportunity to look at other areas. There is an option to check other if there's a specific area that we have not identified in this list. We have a few votes coming in, so we'll leave the question up a few moments longer. And if for some reason you're not familiar with the names of these areas, that's perfectly fine. Feel free to skip that area. And then, of course, if you have any other suggestions or questions, you're welcome to reach out to us later, and we'll provide contact information for that. There is a question coming in about if there's a map for these areas, and yes, you will see that shortly, and we'll look at some specific sites. So it looks like we have some votes coming in, but maybe they've stopped. So we'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Okay. And it seems like the majority of people are identifying North El Camino Real and the Rancho San Clemente specific plan area as where some of the housing should be going. And again, this is not set in stone. This is just to get a general idea. We'll go into a little bit further regarding the specific sites. Now, potential sites being considered for rezone, based on current zoning, as we previously talked about, we can accommodate only about 400 units. We need another 577 units. And there are not enough sites that are properly zoned to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. The density that the state law requires is 30 units to the acre. So there are certain locations that we're identifying as potential sites as for rezoning, and these are the groupings of the locations of the first set of sites. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to take a look at it so you can orient yourself. And the next poll question would come up. So in the first group of sites, what would you feel would be the appropriate kind of intensity for uses? Medium density, that's about 24 units to the acre, which we will not be able to qualify them for lower income, but probably moderate income. Or medium high density up to about 30 units to the acre. Those are probably going to be condos and townhomes with or without commercial uses.
Yeah, and while the poll is open, Veronica, do you want to go back to the map for this first
Sure.
question? And we can sort of explain where these sites are if someone's unfamiliar.
Yeah, you could move the poll questions to a side if it's blocking your screen, if you're able to do that for the audience. Otherwise, and unfortunately, it gets stuck in the middle.
Yes, thank you. So we have quite a few people that have entered their poll. We'll give it a few more moments. And so at the top of your screen is a site that's currently vacant. It's adjacent to a church. And towards the bottom of the map, there's a couple of commercial sites.
Yeah. I want to let you know that this is just, again, to get your general impression. We will have a survey posted on the city's website later, probably about next week, where you will be able to site by site indicate your preference. So the next group of the next group of sites has a lot of them right now. The majority of them, we are identifying them as potential rezone to moderate income sites, and will give us a lot of units. We do have moderate income regional housing needs allocation that we have to fulfill as well. And here are the general groupings of the sites. So if I go back to this, the high density ones that we're talking about are probably the isolated properties that we're talking about. The whole group in the middle, the big group in the middle, that's the we're proposing possible for 24 units to the acre. So here's another poll for you to indicate your preference. Do you think the entire group should be appropriate for moderate, or do you think it can go higher to 30 units per acre? Again, we will have a survey that allows you to indicate site-by-site preference.
And we did have a question that came in asking about maps for the areas as a whole, and we'll definitely have that available on our website. Someone's also asking how many people have voted, and right now we have 16 attendees this evening. Not everyone's voted, but we can certainly post those results on our website so you have the exact numbers for that. And they are anonymous, so it would just be numbers. Go ahead and share these results.
And it seems to me, oh, okay. The majority actually are leaning towards higher density in those areas. Okay. So the next set of properties, there are just two sites that we're talking about along Pico, and we are proposing possibly going higher than 30 units to the acre here, and they're in the RH district for 40 units to the acre. These are vacant properties right now, and Jennifer, maybe you can give a little bit of locational reference to that.
Yeah, absolutely. These sites are located at the east end of the city, adjacent to the county jurisdiction. And if you look at the two sites that are highlighted in red, the corner that's created at the northwest is an existing apartment complex. And even further north of that, there's additional multifamily housing. So this may be a good opportunity to have additional multifamily housing opportunities adjacent to multifamily. Go ahead and launch the poll. And so here we're considering doing that higher density that Veronica mentioned, but maybe there's some thoughts that we would look at a different density. And it should be noted that these sites are in a specific plan area that does have property that's already zoned at 40 dwelling units per acre. So it is consistent with the specific plan. We'll give a couple more seconds. We got a good amount of people voting. Go ahead and show the results for that.
Oh, wow. That's 100% for higher density. That's great. Thank you for the polls. And again, just want to emphasize that we will be posting a specific survey site by site for you to actually indicate your preference site by site. This is just to give you a preview of what the survey would look like, and just for you to kind of think about that before you answer the survey, which we're anticipating to be available next week. With that, I turn over to the safety element to Claudia Tafford. Claudia?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize. Yes, good evening, everyone. At the last combined housing element and safety element workshop, I gave an overview of the safety element. I'm going to just give a brief repeat of that for those of you who weren't able to attend the last workshop. There are new state requirements that require the safety element of the general plan to be updated at the same time as the housing element. And so we're in the process of doing that. The previous safety element was just updated in 2014. So there are some areas that have not changed at all, but there are some areas that, that need to be updated. And there are also some new requirements that the state has imposed that the safety element must address. One of those is to update mapping. So we are updating the maps in the safety element to show the areas that are prone to landslides, flooding, and hazardous materials. Another component of the safety element update is to coordinate with CAL FIRE. And CAL FIRE has a number of new requirements for safety elements for addressing the hazards associated with potential wildfires. So the state is at some point in 2021 going to be updating their very high fire hazard severity zones. That has not been done yet for San Clemente, but there are some of those zones in the city, and they are mostly in the eastern part of the city, and then there's a section in kind of the northwestern portion of the city. We will also update the City of San Clemente critical facilities map. For instance, the location of City Hall has changed since 2014. And a separate but very related effort is the update of the city's local hazard mitigation plan. That is underway. And as part of that effort, an evacuation plan for the city is being prepared. It will be in the local hazard mitigation plan. it will be incorporated by reference when it is ready, and that will be part of the safety element. And then a further requirement of the safety element is to do kind of a high level look at climate change adaptation and resilience. Again, this is a topic that is going to be addressed in much more detail in the local hazard mitigation plan, but it will also be addressed in the safety element. Next slide, please. Okay, next I wanted to talk about, we also did some poll questions in the last workshop, and I wanted to kind of loop back and talk about the results, and then explain how those items are being addressed in the updated safety element. The first poll question we asked participants at the last workshop was, which of the following safety element topics do you feel are most important to the residents of the city of San Clemente? And we asked participants to choose their top 3. You can see the results here: earthquake hazards, emergency services, preparedness, and wildland and urban fire were all ranked very high. Radiological hazards was also indicated by a number of the participants. Next slide, please. So the safety element is addressing each of these topics. Earthquake hazards are addressed in the safety element, and there are policies to, goals and policies to help protect citizens from any earthquake hazards. Fortunately, there are no known earthquake faults in the city of San Clemente, but there are some nearby. As far as wildland and urban fire, the update of the safety element really requires very close coordination with CAL FIRE in order to address and mitigate the fire hazard that faces the city. As we update the safety element, we include a number of items related to wildfire safety that are required by both the county and by the state, by the Uniform Building Code, etc. And once we put together a draft of the element, it has to be approved by the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection prior to the City Council approving the safety element and adopting it. In terms of radiological hazards, the San Onofre nuclear generating station right next door to the city is in the process of being decommissioned. There are a number of public hearings being held as part of that process. There was one just as recently as last month, but the process is underway, and if you're interested in following that process, please check out their website. And then as far as emergency services and preparedness, response and recovery, again, as I mentioned previously, the city of San Clemente's emergency coordinator is currently working on updating the city's local hazard mitigation plan. And that is a really kind of more in-depth document that addresses emergency services. Next slide, please. So the other question, that poll question that was asked, was regarding climate change. And the city of San Clemente adopted a sea level rise vulnerability assessment in 2019. So that has recently had a very close look at what type of hazards are expected in the coming years in relation to climate change. However, we wanted to know what other climate change related concerns residents care about. And the slide shows the results of that poll. Obviously, wildfire and drought can be very closely related to wildfire. Rising temperatures was also mentioned, and extreme precipitation events. Next slide, please. So as a follow-up, there's a lot of literature that's been put out by the state. There's a lot of organizations and state organizations that are addressing climate change. As far as rising temperatures, fortunately, this is not projected to be a really serious issue for the coastal communities. during this upcoming century. Whereas for the inland communities, it's a much more serious issue. Drought, the city already has a number of water conservation measures in place and drought tolerant landscaping measures as well in place. And again, wildfire, I've already talked about that, how the safety element really has a lot of requirements to meet the state's goals for putting in policies and things to help mitigate that wildfire hazard for the city. And as far as extreme precipitation events, the city also has flood mitigation protections and landslide mitigation measures in place to also address flooding. So with that, I welcome any questions that you might have, and I'd like to turn it back to Jennifer.
Hi, thank you, Claudia. Yeah, so if we could have the PowerPoint up just for a little bit longer, just wanted to provide information if you did have any questions, if you want to reach out. The city is happy to have individual conversations with any of the attendees or take your questions that we can incorporate into a frequently asked question or FAQ sheet that we can post on our website. You're welcome to contact me in the email shown on the slide. Our contact information is also available on the city's website. And now is a great opportunity to take a look at some questions that have come in during the presentation. And we'll go through these questions, and if we can't answer them, as Veronica mentioned, we'll certainly follow up and provide that information at a later date. So the first question is, were the 5th cycle RHNA numbers met? And Veronica did review this on a slide. And Veronica, do you want to give a brief summary of whether we've met our 5th cycle RHNA numbers?
Sure. Our 5th cycle number was 581 units. Overall, we constructed 675 units. So in terms of the total number, we exceeded the RHNA. But by income category, we don't. We, at market, we've met more of the market rate housing, almost double the requirement. But then in terms of very low and moderate income, we are less than half of the requirement that we are required to do. But we are allocated to do so.
Thank you. The next question is about ADUs. And the attendee asks, how many ADUs were constructed in the 5th cycle and what was their affordability? So for between 2013 and today, or rather I should say last year, we've had, let's see, we've had a total of 70 applications. So over the course of 7 years, we had 70 applications. But as of last year, only, that seems a little off. Oh, that's why. Okay, so only about 25 were constructed, and that's as of last summer. So something to consider is we had a large influx of ADU applications in 2019 and 2020. So as of last summer, summer of 2020, there were several of those applications that were still under review. In terms of total activity, again, there were 70 applications. So we would anticipate that shortly for the 5th cycle, we would have 70 ADUs. Something to note is I don't have the affordability level, but each year we do provide housing information to the state. And during that review, we do analyze what their affordability level is. And oftentimes they are under the market rate level. The next question is, what sort of housing we're proposing for all of the sites that we showed? And something to note is we are looking at potentially rezoning the sites to allow either housing where it's not allowed now, and specifically more medium or high density depending on the area. Veronica, did you have anything to add about what sort of housing we're considering for these sites?
Well, we're only proposing in terms of density. It really depends on the developers to come in, but definitely at that kind of density, we are probably looking at primarily condos, some townhomes, but condos and apartments. That's the kind of appropriate density that we're looking for.
Okay, great, thank you. And someone asked if there was a map for these areas. Sorry, we've said that a couple of times, that we'll have additional mapping and comment opportunities shortly. Let's see. A question about high resource areas. Are all of the areas we're considering high resource areas, close to transit, jobs, and shopping? I think either myself or Veronica can provide some input on that. Veronica, do you want to try and take that question?
I'm not sure that all of your areas would be considered high resource, because we know that public transit is an issue with San Clemente in general in places, but they would be considered higher resources because they are located along corridors, or they're located in areas that are closer to shopping, and so I don't know whether by definition that they meet that definition, but I think we picked the locations that are closer to shopping, closer to jobs, and closer to transit.
Thank you. And just to add to that, the term the high resource area does refer to a term that SCAG, or the Southern California Association of Governments, uses to identify areas where housing should be focused. Oftentimes it's in regards to transportation and job opportunities. Right. And here in the city of San Clemente, we have some what they call transportation priority areas, or TPAs, as well as job centers. And well, we have one job center, and that job center is near the Rancho San Clemente Business Park. And so some of our sites are quite near that job center, if you will, that high resource area. And then some of our sites that we're considering are also near transportation priority areas. And we can certainly make that those locations available from a map perspective, so you can visually see where those are. And the person that asked the question, if you're familiar with that, you may also be able to navigate to the SCAG website to see what resources they have. But yes, we can definitely make that information available and show that connection. Next question is, why are we not looking at including affordable units with the moderate income units on some of the sites?
I think that, well, if I can just add to it, we're not actually proposing any particular income level of building units, and like we're looking at just density as a proxy. The higher the density, the more feasible a development can occur at lower income. And so we're generally using 30 units to the acre and above as feasible for lower income, and 24 units to the acres as feasible for moderate income. But how they're going to be built in terms of affordability, it's going to be determined by the market.
So Veronica, would you say that when we're looking at these sites and we're talking about affordability or income level, that we are maybe identifying the possibility of,
right, it's the right, it's just whether it's feasible. And the way the state looks at it is at a particular density at 30 units to the acre or higher, it's feasible to do lower income housing with a reasonable amount of subsidies. It doesn't mean that at market, you will be able to build affordable housing without subsidies. It's just that the amount of subsidies required would be more reasonable. So, and again, the state uses density as a feasibility proxy. You could definitely do affordable housing at 24 units to the acre if the developer is able to package the financing And you can, in some communities, you can do affordable housing, and the city has done that too. The city has done affordable housing in densities that are more like 16 or 18 units to the acre in the past, if a particular developer was able to find adequate financing for it.
Thank you. The next question is, are any of these sites city owned? So with the exception of one site that has some city ownership, none of the sites that we're looking at thus far do have city ownership. Let's see. The next question is, when will the draft 6-cycle housing element be made public for review? Veronica, do we have an approximate timeline when we might have a public review draft for that?
We anticipate a couple more months before we will release the draft. We would definitely, before we release the draft housing element, well, when we release the draft housing element, we will have additional public meetings where you would be able to review the draft housing element and then make comments on it as well, either before the Planning Commission or some other kind of public forum. But I anticipate maybe a couple more months.
Thank you. The next question is about the emergency shelter overlay. Has the city considered expanding the emergency shelter overlay to include the property on Pico, which is owned by the Emergency Shelter Coalition? You know, I don't know the answer to that. Veronica, do you know?
I'm not aware of that particular that property, but one thing that we have to do in the future is to amend the zoning code to address the low barrier navigation centers, which are kind of like emergency or transitional housing for the homeless, as they are waiting to be transitioned into permanent housing. So that is something that we will be addressed as part of the housing element, as required by state law.
Great, and we can definitely look into that question and provide an answer to that question.
Is it possible for them to, Jennifer, do you know the property they're talking about? Or if not, can they type the address or at least the location so we can research on that?
Yeah, that's a great idea. If the attendee wants to provide an address or a more descriptive location, that would be great. Otherwise, we will try and dig in for the ownership and look for a property that's owned by the Emergency Shelter Coalition. Thank you. So the next question is, do you plan on ensuring that the low-income housing will be built this time, so during the 6th cycle?
Well, the city is definitely looking in updating the inclusionary housing ordinance to provide for a more kind of like periodic update to the in-lieu fee, which the city will be used to facilitate low-income housing. But again, I think the city has a pretty good track record in providing affordable housing at even at 30 or 40% of the arena. That's generally a better performance than most community, and I think the city is committed to doing a lot of that. However, the market and the availability of funding really determines how much affordable housing can be built.
Great, thank you. And just to add to that, the city is definitely looking at expanding partnerships with affordable housing developers and looking for additional opportunities to continue the work that we've done in the past to actually have affordable housing units constructed here. The next question is in regards to expanding the emergency shelter overlay, which we've covered. And then the next step, or I'm sorry, the next question is, what steps are being taken to ensure this proposed housing element accounts for anticipated COVID-related evictions that will happen this year?
I think as part of the housing element, we'll look into definitely the family assistance ministries. That's been one great resource in the city. But we'll cover the housing element. Will probably cover policies and potential kind of programs about emergency housing or assistance in the future.
Great, thank you. And as part of the draft housing element, the city will have to propose some housing programs, and it's in that list of housing programs that we would consider incorporating those specific measures or actions to address additional evictions if need be. Let's see, the next question is, will you make sure that affordable housing is also built throughout the city so it's not segregated?
And I think the city's inclusionary housing program does do that, because it ensures like in projects that either built on site or that we get funding for other affordable housing. And if you look at the proposed sites, not proposed, like potential sites for rezoning, it's located throughout the city. It's not necessarily concentrated in one particular location. So by rezoning those properties, that gives additional opportunities for affordable housing to be located in other parts of the city. So that's having an inclusionary policy, and also the distribution, the geographic distribution of the proposed sites are some of the strategies for making sure that we're not concentrating low-income housing.
Great, thank you. And our next question is in regards to our affordable housing overlay zone. So for the sites that are identified for the affordable housing overlay, what policies, let me read the question word for word. I may have identified this question. So for the sites identified as feasible for affordable housing, what policies or programs would be implemented to make it more likely that affordable housing is built on those sites? Density alone will not create affordable housing. So as we take a look at these potential sites for housing in general, and then specifically identify where very low, or moderate income housing units may be more feasible, we would use our housing programs in conjunction with that site identification to help support the development of affordable housing. Some of those programs were presented in our presentation tonight, existing programs that we would continue, the Inclusionary Housing Program, and then also, let's see, what else? We do have several other programs that work on partnerships with affordable housing developers that look at helping to bring in those potential developments and partnerships to the city. In addition, we've recently adopted a lot consolidation ordinance. So you will see several sites from our fifth cycle housing element that are quite small. And it's only with combining those sites that we would really get the maximum value out of developing those sites as residential and being able to accommodate the affordable housing units. So that's a great thing that we were able to accomplish just recently. And there's some other additional programs in our fifth cycle housing element, and then we would look to continue those and/or add programs for our sixth cycle. Yeah. If you have any ideas, feel free to email those to us, and we can incorporate those into our draft housing element that we were working on. So Veronica, earlier you answered that 24 versus 30 units per acre determines whether affordable housing units are more feasible at a site. Why did you propose zoning for only 24 units per acre at several sites?
Right. Well, remember one of the requirements of the housing element law is to provide a variety of housing types for all income groups, including moderate and above moderate income. And so not only do we have to provide sites that are suitable for lower income in terms of density, we also need to provide sites that are for at a more moderate income, moderate density that would provide more like townhomes type of development. And that's the reason why we have some of the sites also proposed for maybe a moderate kind of density. But again, you will see, we will post a survey where we go site by site, and we'll give you the options that whether you want to go higher density or lower density or other types of density that you would be able to write in, and other options that you think is appropriate for those locations. And so this tonight, that is like a preview, but again, the reminder is that we have to provide a variety of housing types for all income groups. So we're not trying to fulfill all the entire arena with high density housing, because we need to provide maybe some of the small lot subdivisions or townhomes or condos that may be larger, and then apartment buildings, senior housing. So a variety of density for a variety of housing types.
Thank you. And there is a comment that we will get the address for the Emergency Shelter Coalition property. Thank you for that. And then the next question is about emergency shelters and asks, will the city commit to supporting the development of an emergency shelter here in San Clemente? The city's actions so far have been very hostile to such a shelter, which seems improper. It conflicts with the policy of promoting fair housing. So from the perspective that the information that I know, we're certainly open to applications. I don't know whether there is a formal commitment that the city council is planning to make, but certainly we have the opportunity to establish one of those. Veronica, do you have anything else to add?
No, unfortunately, I'm not aware of any particular application for shelters like now or in the recent years. If there's been discussions, I'm sure that the city is open to that.
Thank you. Yeah, and we will definitely continue our survey of regional shelters and assess whether there's an opportunity to bring a shelter in the city of San Clemente and/or a need to do so. And certainly the need may have been presented in the past, and so when we do our outreach to the regional shelters, we'll be able to assess whether there is a current need. So that is the end of our questions at this time. We certainly welcome any additional questions, and again, welcome to have conversations further in the future. We want to thank everyone who's attended tonight's community workshop. Thank you for being patient while we do this in a virtual format, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Veronica, do you want to add anything else before we sign off?
Just a reminder, checking the city's website